So good morning, everyone. We have Rasam Hossain as our guest speaker today. We're lucky to have him. He is a senior full stack engineer working in the localization team under marketing at GitLab. He has extensive experience, I think 8 years of professional experience in software localization and internalization. Uh, Internationalization. He holds a master's degree from University of Saskatchewan, the Interaction Lab, and a bachelor degree of computer science and engineering from Islamic University of Technology. And prior to joining GitLab, he worked at Dayforce as an enterprise lab for the enterprise level software HCM solutions. So we are looking forward to hearing about the localization at GitLab. So Rasam, if you are ready, you can start your presentation for your viewers.
My name is Rasam. I am a senior full stack engineer at GitLab. I work in the marketing department of GitLab under the localization team. And today I wanted to actually introduce to the very niche, interesting area of software localization and how we do at GitLab. So let's kind of try to understand what exactly even the word localization means. I'm sorry, just having a little bit difficulty. I guess the slide is changed now. Okay, so what is localization? If you guys are kind of wondering what is L10N here, this is basically nothing. It just means there are 10 characters between the letter L and N. That's basically all it. But localization or software localization is basically means that the entire process of adapting a product or a software product or a software service for a particular locale. That's what the most simplistic definition of localization. You can think of the local as a region, which means it could be a country, it could be a state, or even it could be just a simple province. So, like most of you and even myself, when I start to think about localization or software localization, I always think that maybe this is something about translation. I mean, what else is there? You have a website, you want to have it some other country, so you want your customers to see your website in a different language. What else is there? Maybe there is something more. Let's see. So you say, for example, have a business in Windsor, Ontario, okay? Let's just think about just from the perspective of a website. You may have to open your or expose your website to somewhere else. Let's say you're exposing your website to a location in China, right? Let's just not confuse or complicate things about opening a retail store and whatnot. Let's just think about just a website localizing in China. What exactly do you need to think about? Okay, so the first and the very first thing is obviously you need to translate your content. You need to have everything that is in your website in English that has to be shown in the Chinese language, right? There is no confusion about it, right? Second thing, maybe how about the currency? How many times you have gone to a website, try to pay for something and see that, okay, if this is not your local currency, or let's say Canadian dollar, would you pay for it? Would you pay for a US dollar concerning considering that how much foreign exchange fees that you have to pay? So 13% of the consumers or clients, they're not going to even pay if the currency is not into their local currency. So that is one section of localization that you have to do on your website. How about the payment option itself? Some countries like US would actually consider having Visa as their primary currency. Some countries like Canada prefers PayPal. There are countries like Saudi Arabia that actually wants to use Apple Pay instead. So the payment method also needs to be prioritized based on the locale that you were localizing your software for. Now, think about the customer support that you have to give to your clients, okay? For example, if you are localizing your software for Japan, the Japanese customers are really, really patient. You know, only 30% of the Japanese consumers expect an answer right away, which is very, very low compared to the global average of 50%. But think about French customers. If you're opening your website or localizing your website for France, the French consumers actually want, the 73% of French consumers actually expect an immediate response on any channel, and they expect the problem to be solved on the spot. So these are just very few examples of what needs to be taken care of when you are localizing or opening your software services or product to a different locale. But there are some other things that you also need to understand. Some other topic which is kind of really interesting and important, which is also known as internationalization or I18N. What is internationalization? What is the difference between localization and internationalization? It's kind of similar, but internationalization is more for the software engineering perspective. So while in the localization, we said that localization is the process of adapting a product or a service for a specific locale or market. In that direction, the internationalization is in the opposite direction, means that this is the process of designing and developing a software or product that can be adapted to different languages and cultures. Okay, they just these two definitions sounds very similar. I will explain how it differs. Let's say the same website. Let's say you are internationalizing the dashboard of your software application or a website, and you need to set some sort of keys for the welcome message that you show on the dashboard of your website. Let's say right at this moment, you are opening up your software only in English and Spanish, okay? So let's say there is a key called title in your dashboard, and the English version obviously is going to say welcome, and the Spanish version would be bienvenido. I'm sure I'm pronouncing bienvenido pretty incorrectly, but you get the picture. So when you are going to quote the dashboard page, this is how you're going to work on internationalizing it. Instead of saying, let's say, confirm welcome and putting it into like braces, saying confirm welcome or confirm bienvenido, directly you're going to have it embedded into a variable called title, and you can store what goes into the title field in a different file. So for English, you have a bunch, you have a file with all the variables in it. One of them could be title. For Spanish, you're going to have another file that has all the information about all the variables, but it will be written in Spanish. So instead of every single time you want to give them the welcome message, you are going to be expecting to bring the right language file and show it up on the screen. But this way, once you are done localizing or internationalizing your software in Spanish and English, you want to go and work with a Chinese customer, all you have to do is you have to have a new file for Chinese, but you don't have to make any changes on the website's embedded software code. So that is a one-time expense. So that's basically, these are the two most important. There's also another topic that we kind of need to understand, which is globalization. This is actually far more simpler. When we talk about globalization, that just basically means that anytime when you want to go global, anytime you want to make your business globally, going to a whole bunch of people, that's just basically what means as a globalization itself. These three terms are kind of interrelated, but you can see in this slide here that the translation is basically a subset of localization, and the localization itself is a subset of internationalization, and the whole part of internationalization and localization is basically a subset of globalization itself. So that's basically more or less the connection between these three terms. It was important to actually explain these three terms before we even go deeper. Okay, let's move on. This is important subject to understand to actually go forward, which is Git. I'm assuming that as a software science Students, we have a good level of understanding of Git, but for the folks who doesn't know what Git is a distributed version control system that basically tracks the version of your files. So for example, let's say you are working on a software project. Let's say you're working on a code snippet, and it's going to take like 10 to 15 days. You wake up every single day, you write some code, and you save the file at the end of the day, and you go to sleep. Next day, you come again and do the same thing, and you do it for over 10 days. Let's say for some reason you think on the 10th day, you don't know, or you make an error for the function that you wrote in your 8th day, and you don't know how to fix that anymore. You really have to go back to your 6th day and find the file that you made the changes and recover it. If you're working on like a Windows-based or Mac-based operating system, you just cannot directly go back and do that. I mean, obviously you probably can because of the cloud-based systems right now, but it wasn't really possible. So if we are thinking from a local perspective, just working on your hard drive, this is really not simple. Git allows you to do that. So instead of, let's make it one more level complex. Instead of one file, let's say you're working on 100 files over 6 months period. This becomes much and much more complex for you to understand or even remember what changes you made for each of these files. So every single day, what Git would do is basically come create a copy of what you have done, make changes on your 100 files and keep a snapshot of it. Okay, what happens if you're working with 100 developers, which are located, distributed all over the world? You have to work and manage a whole software project working with 100 developers, and probably you're working with thousands of files. Git is going to allow you to do that. Okay, enough about Git. We don't really want to go too much into Git because this presentation is not about Git. So let's move on for the next one. I think it is valuable to actually give a little bit of description about GitLab itself. GitLab is a web-based Git repository. What the repository means is you can think about a software project. So the software project, if it is located in your local hard disk, this is basically is not going to if it is in your local hard disk, you cannot actually work with a distributed system. So GitLab allows you to have a web-based or cloud-based Git repository where you can upload every single files that you have. And then this is going to provide you with free, open, and private repositories. It also gives you the capability to follow certain issues. You can think about issues as a feature request on your software and wikis as well. In addition to that, this is also a complete DevOps platform that actually enables software engineers to perform all sorts of tasks in the project. So let's say from all the way from project planning, source code management, and monitoring. So say, for example, at the beginning of the software planning phase, you might have to create epics. Epics would be basically thinking about what sort of feature you are working on. You can have certain milestones which you want to obtain when you are trying to obtain certain goal in your epic summary. So milestone, you can think about that by this particular due date, I want to complete this feature. Now, you can also break down the epics into smaller issues. So the epics can be broken down into smaller tasks or issues. You can assign these issues to developers. Developers would come into the GitLab system. They can create and work on these issues, create merge request. Merge request basically means that they are making all these changes and committing the file in a Git using Git, which actually opens a merge request that basically allows them for other developers to come into the merge request and review it so they can push the code into the GitLab repository, and the automatic set of scanning for any type of vulnerability or issues in there that works on GitLab also takes care of that. Other developers can come into the merge request, they review it, ask the software engineer to make changes on the merge request. If they are all approved, then the merge gets accepted and deployed into the system. So GitLab basically allows you to go all the way from planning the project and all the way to deploying it. So going back into how we do localization in GitLab, this is the slide where it actually starts. Okay, so let's think about the repository as source code management system. I also have the content code management system, or CMS, here. For those who don't understand, you might actually hear about Drupal or Contentful or Decaf CMS. This is probably much more valuable or important for folks who are working in the marketing side of things. So about.gitlab.com or the GitLab's website is going to have that. But if you guys don't know what CMS is, it's fine. You can ignore this. Let's just think about the source code management system. So quite a few slides before, I talked about the internationalizing your software and having the titles string located in a different file. These are the files that we need to send to the translators. As a software engineer at GitLab, we have no way of knowing or understanding or even having the capability to translate into a whole bunch of language. We're not translators. We are software engineers, so we cannot actually do the translation for any language that we want. We need to send all these files to the translators. The translators actually translate them and send this back to us. To make matters easier for translators, they actually use something called Translation Management System, or TMS. I'm going to explain what TMS is, but this is basically a system where the translators know what language files are coming in, how they actually manage it. This is more for the project management system. So instead of us, GitLab, sending all these files all the way to translators in raw, so whether it is an Excel file or Markdown file or YAML or JSON file, instead of sending the files to the translators directly, to, I don't know, emailing them, it's just basically absolutely nonsense. So we would actually upload it. We can actually upload them to a TMS system where the translators can come and do the translations. Okay. The errors here are not correct. So we basically send English files to the translators and bring these files back translated. Okay, this is silly. Now, at GitLab, we also actually do not talk to the TMS systems directly. Sorry, I actually went ahead of myself. I actually need to explain TMS system first. Sorry about that. What is translation management system? I should have explained this first before actually move on. So a translation management system is basically a software that centralizes your translation efforts. It is going to automate any repetitive tasks that translators do and actually help them to keep their team organized. Because if they are managing all these translations by themselves from different set of files like Markdown, YAML, JSON, it is going to become a logistical nightmare. They also don't have to really memorize all these translations that they have done because there are strings that is going to be in the translation management system that they've already translated. What if we can store all this in a memory, and then next time if the same set of strings come, they can actually use the translation memory and utilize this. The translation management system would also have the translation memory built into that, and that's basically all there is. The translation management system, there is a whole bunch in the market. There is Phrase TMS, there is Crowding, there is SmartLink, there is MemoQ. Different companies work with different TMS systems. Some companies work with multiple TMS systems, but we are going to use 3 of this TMS system in our current pipeline, and I'm going to come back to what these are soon. Okay, going back to this previous slide. At GitLab, we don't talk to the TMS systems directly. We actually have a request management system or RMS in between. The request management system is actually the tool that we normally talk to. And the reason why there is an request management system there is because it acts as an intermediate layer between GitLab on the left and the TMS systems on the right. The request management system or RMS also helps to make sure the strings are sent to the right vendor and the right TMS system. What exactly the RMS is going to help us achieve, this is going to be more clear when I deep dive into the next set of architecture diagrams, but the request management system is what actually enables us to keep everything not centralized to one TMS or one set of vendors, or make sure that we can quickly move from one scope to another. Let's actually understand what we do for what tools we use for each of these systems here. The source code management system obviously is going to be GitLab here. It can be also any sort of other contentful or any sort of other CMS system that we use. The request management system that we use here is Argo. For translation management system, we use more or less three different type of translation management system called Phrase, Translation OS, and Crowding. These are three different translation management system that we use for different type of strings that we go with. There is also Argos Multilingual and the translated team that we work with who are translators. Here, Argos Multilingual uses Phrase TMS. The translated team uses the translation OS. And I know that I have not shown anything for the crowding, but we use crowding to translate all sorts of our GitLab product strings, and crowding is where you can go and volunteer to translate the strings for our GitLab product. Okay. Let's move into the architecture diagram of our marketing team. Instead of having like a simple pipeline here. So let's say this is CMS system. This stays under GitLab. This is where the GitLab's region is. This is where the region of Argo is, and this is the region on the right is for the TMS system. And you can understand that there are translators coming into this particular TMS system. Okay, so in the contentful, the content manager, the folks that actually write contents, or developers, or basically anyone who works on this TMS system, and let's say they commits the files and whatnot, or make changes to a bunch of contents on the website. Once that's done, as microservice that is built by Argo tries to capture every single thing and sends those files to the Argo web services on their backend. This is actually communicated through an API, and once that is done, either the localization team or the person that actually make those requests, or even anybody in the Argo can come and see into their dashboard. Okay, these are all the strings that we come. These are all the translation tasks that needs to be done, or translation requests that needs to be completed. I need to send this translation task to the translation management system I need to work with. Obviously, they have a database where they have stored everything. So the translation management, the web services that Argo has, or the database that Argo has, that actually basically tracks every request that is coming from GitLab, stores them, and sends them to the TMS system. And once that is done from the TMS system, done translation by the translators, the Argo knows that, okay, these are the requests that has been completed. If there is any sort of other filtering or other sort of cleaning requires, Argo can also do it. Say there are cases where we have sent files to Argo. Argo captures them. We send the file to the TMS system to say translation OS or Phrase TMS. The translators comes in, does the translation, but in the whole process, because it is going through a whole bunch of different systems, there is some sort of breaking there, or something goes wrong there that actually changes the characters in the file. So Argo can also verify that and send this back into our contentful system. So this is basically, you can think about more or less what you can think of a simple pipeline that we have for the marketing department. But it gets a little more complex for the website, let's say just for the about.gitlab.com. So anybody who have not been to the website, I can go and quickly show what this looks like. So if you go to about.gitlab.com, you can see that it actually gives the information. This is basically the marketing website that tells about the clients. You can find a whole bunch of resources from here, including the blog for GitLab, which is the blog part is under Contentful. It gives all the information about the pricing and whatnot. Anyway, going back to the slide, I think I was here. Just the about.gitlab section or the web page comes from two different areas. One is from the CMS, which is Contentful, and other one is from a repository located in GitLab. Now you can kind of try to understand or perceive the fact that how Argo is actually dealing with it. So the integration service that they had for Contentful is what grabbing all these English strings, going to Argo and going all the way to the translated vendor. Anything that is changed in the GitLab repository, any changes made done, whether by the developers or maybe other content creators, it doesn't matter who does it on the repository itself. Argo also takes them and send it to the translation management for vendors. It also has a whole bunch of analytics report, so we can actually go and when we see and try to understand what's going on the back end of it, we can understand that, okay, something has gone wrong and we have to fix it. So the about.gitlab.com website can also be somewhat complex because not only every single theme that we have to send to the Argo for translation, there are content creators who might have to also directly work on the website itself in a different language. So let me explain how that works. So let's say you have content in English, you have that is working for Canada, that's great. But when it goes to Japan, you cannot just go and send all the files to Argo and get it translated by your vendor. You need to actually go it through the content manager themselves, because the content managers can come to the website itself or the Contentful CMS itself, and then actually create or transcreate the original content. This is called transcreation and not translation, and they might have to change certain files or certain words in the content. So, which is why we cannot actually have every single thing directly managed by Argo themselves as well. But this is more or less clear. This is what we have for our marketing one. But let's see how it becomes complicated for the technical documentations of GitLab. So the tech docs of GitLab actually have 5 repositories. You can see all these 5 repositories that is available here. These are all available publicly, and the docs.gitlab.com, the website, is actually where it fetches from 5 different repositories. So instead of one, now the architecture diagram needs to be revisited and actually work on 5 different repositories itself. So how does the docs.gitlab looks like? I'm going to show you here so it is much more clear. So docs.gitlab.com basically is the technical documentation for GitLab itself, meaning that you can find practically any information about what features are available at GitLab. So you can go to this webpage and then search for CI/CD. You can go and find any sort of CI/CD pipeline and literally understand what type of pipelines are there, how to schedule and trigger a pipeline and whatnot. And you can have all sorts of tutorial and everything here. So this one website is actually under 5 different repositories, and technical writers have the ability to come to these repositories and work on any sort of technical documentation. So when it becomes a situation where you are dealing with different type of content, we actually need to send the translation to different type of translation vendors also. So for example, this is how complex it starts to become into the tech docs repository, which are right here. There are 5 of repositories, so we can create like a fork of all these repositories. For those who doesn't know what a fork is, this is basically taking a copy of a repository under the region of localization, and then we can work on the forks of all these 5 repositories. And technical writers, when they come work into the docs repo of these 5 repositories, this goes to the Argo by the same microservices tool. And Argo knows that, okay, this is a request type coming from 5 of this docs repo. If these are the request type that's coming from for tech docs, I need to actually send this to phrase TMS. And for the phrase TMS, the vendor is Argos Multilingual, or the translators. They are going to come into the phrase TMS and work on this translation. For the previous one, which is about .gitlab.com, which is our marketing side of things, is where this is actually, as you may remember, this is coming from 2 different locations, which is both Contentful, CMS, and normal GitLab repository. So this is still being handled by Argo as a request management service in the middle layer. They know that, okay, this is a marketing content, this needs to be sent to translated. And translation OS or translated team has to come and do this translation. This is kind of what the architecture looks like, but this, you may have some questions. Okay, why not work with one translation management system or one set of vendors? Why are we dealing with all of this in the middle layer? And the answer to this question is the type of content that you are translating, the type of content you are actually localizing is fairly important to actually choose what vendor you actually go with. So the translation OS here, or the translated team here, is much more experienced and expert on marketing related content, which is why anything that comes from about.gitlab.com, anything that is related to marketing, or all the strings related to marketing, including blogs and whatnot, they have to be routed to the translated team. Anything that is the technical writers who are working on the technical documentations on these 5 repositories, all these technical docs related strings has to be routed to Argos Multilingual, or the phrase TMS. This is how this has to work, which is what it makes more complex. And now you can understand that, okay, the Argos is doing a great job in the Argo is doing a great job in the middle, and the request management system, why it's so important. Another important factor about the request management system here in the middle is that, for example, if we ever want to end up not going with one of the vendors on the right section for any reason, we can very quickly change it. And as a GitLab team, we don't have to actually worry about working with a completely brand new TMS. We don't have to rewrite all the codes and basically everything, create the new microservice to work with the new vendor. Argo, as a request management team, they are actually going to deal with it. And that is not going to be an issue for us because Argo already works with a whole bunch of TMS systems. So they are already well capable of working with a bunch of TMS systems anyway. So without any delay, we can actually switch vendors as well. The last part is the reason why the request management system becomes extremely valuable for going forward is that this can also be used to expand the request management system or the TMS system working with anything that has to deal with any sort of machine learning or AI. So for example, the phrase TMS, we send markdown files and YAML files and JSON files and whatnot. we can actually plug in a neural machine translation with the phrase TMS. What it is going to do is that the neural machine translation, it is going to do the translation on behalf of the translators. The reason why NMT could be really beneficial, obviously, is because the content translation by a real human is slightly expensive. Let's say, for example, if you are thinking about Canadian French, there is a cost associated with it, which is pretty high because Canadian French is a protected language. But let's say you are working with some sort of Spanish Mexico that's not protected, so the price differs. NMT is going to make sure that the price is more or less much cheaper, and that works for the benefit of GitLab in terms of managing the cost. Now, the NMT or the neural machine translation, once that's done, that still needs to be go through a post-editing by a human. Post-editing would basically means that whatever translation has been done, is it done correctly or not? So before going through a human, in this section here, it can also be done using a large language model. So the post-editing can be done through an large language model, and then once that's done, it goes to language quality assurance by a team of manual translators, and once that's done, that can come back to the phrase TMS at the target markdown file, and that's how we are planning to enhance the translation later on at GitLab. That's honestly basically it. That's all I had for today. Any questions? Anything at all?
Okay, thank you, Rasam, for your nice presentation. Any questions? Questions?
Sam, I have a question for you. You are a full stack engineer at GitLab. May I ask how long have you been working at GitLab?
It has been, I have joined GitLab this year. It's been over 6 months now.
So what differentiates GitLab from GitHub? And why should I use, as an engineer, why should I use GitLab over GitHub?
The biggest difference between GitHub and GitLab that I have found is that GitLab provides you the option to scan your complete code base and in the pipeline. That is something I feel like that missing in GitHub, meaning that when you make a commit to your repository, and there is a pipeline that can actually scan for any sort of vulnerability, any sort of security issues, that is helping you to make sure that there is no certain other malware that you introduce or any sort of security concern that you have to face. So GitLab actually helps to make sure that once the pipeline runs, your code doesn't have some level of vulnerability. So which is why I think this is the main difference. But also I have found other issues. Say, for example, with GitLab, let's say for issue management and tracking, if you are using GitHub, you probably have to work with Atlassian Jira or something else for your issue management system. GitLab has already have that built in, so you don't have to worry about that either.
GitHub does have a system for managing issues. No?
Sorry, what
You
was
said when you're using GitHub, you might use Jira for issue management, but GitHub does have a management tool for issues.
Right. No, I'm pretty sure that there is always these competitions going on. Say, for example, GitHub has their Copilot, right? And GitLab has their Duo. and you can use the GitHub Copilot, say for example, helping you to write code, which is what the focus of GitHub's Copilot. But GitLab Duo has that specifically helping you to actually work in the whole process. So for example, this is the slide that I feel like might be interesting. You can basically go into GitLab anytime and then actually find out, okay, this is an issue here. I don't know what this issue means. So summarize this issue for me because I don't have the time to work for it. And then you can even just say, okay, this is the issue, fine. Let me help me to write the code for this issue. So it can basically find it out. Interesting thing that I've also found that, let's say you have a failure in your pipeline and the pipeline has such a huge log and you don't know how to find the right issue in the pipeline. You can just say, okay, open up the GitLab Duo on the same screen and then say, explain me the error, and it will explain it, and you can say, okay, how do I fix it? And it can say, okay, this is what you need to do. These are the files that you need to change in order to fix your pipeline and make it work. So GitLab Duo is basically integrated into the whole set of your complete software delivery process, which I don't know if GitHub has already done that. I have not worked with GitHub Copilot in recent times.
All right, thank you very much. Great presentation.
Any other question? No? Then I'd like to let's thank Rasam for his nice presentation and for giving us the time.
Thank you everyone for joining.